and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the current political situation and what it means for us. Now, over the next 60 minutes, we will be speaking to experts to make some sense of today's developments. So what we know of the day's developments so far, Interim Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad has said that the Yang di-Pertuan Agong has found no one with a clear majority to form the government, and therefore Parliament will be called on Monday, 2nd of March, to determine who has majority support in the Dewan Rakyat to become the next Prime Minister. However, if the Dewan Rakyat fails to find a majority, it will then be decided at the polls. Now, one person who is urging politicians to resolve the current impasse without having to call for snap general elections is Datuk Ambiga Sreenevasan, lawyer and human rights activist. She joins us on the show tonight. Thank you for coming.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you
Welcome.
for having me. Yes.
So, can you begin by explaining your reasons for not wanting Malaysians to go to the polls again?
Oh, I tweeted earlier today, actually. I spoke to Azhar, the EC chair, just to get a rough idea what the cost of general election would be. He informed me that the general election in 2018 cost us about $500 million, 500 million ringgit. The likelihood, if we have a snap election, because everything is done urgently, is possibly between 750 to 800 million. So for me, cost is a big factor. Secondly, I mean, we have the coronavirus, we have so many issues facing us. I'm not sure whether the Rakyat are really up for another election, you know. I'm not sure.
I do want to ask you, though, are politicians up to developing a consensus? I mean, if these were compelling arguments for them, right, the state of the economy, the potential of a pandemic that needs a strong leadership and so on and so forth, then we might not have been in this at this point in time in the crisis, right? So what would change their minds if you said to them, the cost, the coronavirus, the needs of the economy, please find a solution? Do you think it would work?
Well, maybe it's something they haven't considered, because there are many who have actually called for elections, and I was one of the few who said, no, don't do it. So maybe we have to give them reasons why it is an extremely bad idea. I mean, the coronavirus is not a small issue. Governments overseas are treating it as a top priority. It'll be absolutely foolish for us to expose our people to any further risks in relation to that. So I'm hoping some good sense will prevail.
Okay. Now, you've made some compelling arguments about the costs. I mean, these are all rational arguments, but I'm wondering, I mean, you said that a lot of people may not be for elections. However, I know a lot of people who have said they will be, you know, they would rather have the decision in their hands to decide once again. Is that a fair trade-off to say cost over, say, democracy?
No, it's, well, we've had an election, okay? And this is, by the way, what's going on now is about democracy too. It's about coalition politics. It's about working together. You know, democracy is, I've said before, is noisy, it's messy, and this is one of the things that we're facing now. There's no such thing as a perfect democracy. So the thing is, though, you cannot go to a general election at the drop of a hat. There's no two ways about that. You can't keep troubling the people. And I honestly don't think you would be doing a service to the people if you go to the elections now. What may be driving people who want to go to the elections are possibly losers who think they might win this time. Okay, that could be something that's driving them. But I would also say to those who have won, you may lose this time, okay, if you go to the elections. So really, it's a huge gamble as well, a political gamble which they ought to take into account. So at the end of the day, of course, the Rakyat has already spoken. But when you talk about coalition politics, it's a tricky game.
Sure.
I want to come back to your arguments for not going to the polls. You know, often it's mentioned that a good civil service, resilient institutions can in fact function without political leadership, right, in the executive. And we see that in Belgium hasn't had a government for a year, and it's the example that now keeps getting pulled up. The other thing, of course, is that the stimulus package that was announced today. So we have a stimulus package to address the COVID issue, and yet we only have actually a one-man government. And one can imagine that possibility of that the important things will be rolled out operationally despite the lack of resolution at the level of politics.
Oh yes, I think civil service is carrying on. Thank God for them, and thank God for those who are carrying on so that the government in that sense can work. But it is not a desirable situation, because at the end of the day, policies need to be made, decisions need to be made. We need legislation for certain things that are important. So, you know, you could carry on maybe for a week or two, but it is not a desirable situation.
It's just a stopgap measure, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, you've said that you're hoping politicians resolve the impasse, you're hoping that we don't have to go to the snap general elections. What is the resolution that you are hoping for?
Oh, look, the politicians created this. My cry to them is, for goodness sakes, sit down and sort it out.
But which politicians do you want, Ambiga, to be at the table? I mean, we now have many scenarios possible. Tun may be at the center of each of those scenarios, but he could go with UMNO, with the Muafakat. He could go back to Pakistan to form his government. What particular form or shape do you want to see?
Well, I think PH, as it stands now, must reach out to Tun Mahathir. And really, if we could get back to the Friday situation, where they had already agreed on transition and so on and so forth, that would be the easiest thing to do. But of course, a lot has happened between then and now. So I'm not even sure that that's possible. But really, it is something I think everybody should sit down and try and resolve this. Whoever has a stake in this has to sit down and resolve this. There are some who will not come to the table. But I do think that, I would expect look, the people gave Pakatan Harapan a gift of a lifetime, okay? Now we are seeing it being torn to shreds. And I think they owe it to us to fix it.
Who do you blame? Who do you blame for the breakup of Pakatan?
Well, actually, in a way, it's been bubbling beneath the surface for a while, okay? So it's a lot of factors. So when Pakatan Harapan came into power, they were a coalition who had never worked together before, except to fight for the elections. Then you had them having to deal with the civil service, who was possibly not very comfortable with them. That's something that has taken time, but nevertheless, many of them have actually shown progress. We've got some excellent ministers, and there's some wonderful things that are happening. But the constant attacks on Pakatan Harapan by UMNO, PAS and the opposition, they think it's their job to constantly undermine, and well, we'll see, we'll have to differ with them on that, but the constant undermining. And it's not just an undermining on policy and differences of opinion. They use race and religion, and I think we are at one of the lowest points in this country in relation to race relations. So they have really undermined the fabric of our nation. But then there's another factor, the infighting in Pakatan Harapan. So in a sense, there must be self-examination. It's very easy to say, oh, it was that backdoor, that last event. Of course, nobody agrees with that. That was what caused the crisis. No. The crisis was in the making from the beginning. And because there was so much infighting, there were people openly from the parties in government attacking the Prime Minister, etc., etc. There didn't seem to be, didn't seem to be pulling together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from you is there is this kind of perfect storm, kind of a confluence of events that have happened. Are you saying that you, in your mind, think that this is an inevitable situation? That the infighting, that the race relations have all come together to this perfect storm, and here we are now?
Actually, to be fair, I mean, they're all human. And I think maybe because after 60 years, this brand new government comes into being, never having worked together before. It's a huge responsibility. And we never had a chance to have a reconciliation with our past. They were just thrust into the future. Expectations were incredibly high. I'm not sure whether we were also fair with them. And so I think that caused a problem. But because there was no confrontation with the past, we didn't look at what we did, there was no plan. We were actually a government in transition. PH was actually a government in transition. But unfortunately, there was no, they seemed, some of them seemed to be unable to cope, actually, at certain times, which is why there were so many U-turns. They were not communicating well with the public. They were not explaining their policies with the public. And so it just seemed to be everybody just doing it on the hop, as it were, because they were landed with that and they're doing it on the run. So I think it's a lot of that as well, that there was no plan, really, and each one seemed to be going off in their own direction.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break and continue this conversation in just a couple of minutes, so don't go anywhere. Stay with us right here on Consider This. Welcome back to this special edition of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris with me, Sharaad, Kuttan. We're speaking tonight to Datuk Ambiga Sreenevasan, lawyer and human rights activist. Just before the break, Ambiga, you mentioned that you seemed almost sympathetic to the inexperience of the Pakatan Harapan government, the first time in Putrajaya. But not too long ago, you said that if the government did not implement key reforms by, say, June, you would have no choice but to take to the streets once again. I'm wondering how that jives, because on one hand you're saying, well, you can understand why there's U-turns, and then on the other hand you're saying, well, you're not implementing the reforms fast enough. And on the other hand, I wonder whether, with three hands now, whether all of this has happened because there's been a backlash to all the policy and institutional reforms that Pakatan Harapan has tried or unpopularly tried to implement.
Okay, I was sympathetic at the beginning, all right? But I very quickly, my sympathy wore off, I'm afraid, and maybe that's wrong on my part, but the expectations are so high, and I felt that the window for reform was closing, because as it's well known, I think, that if you don't get your reforms in almost immediately when you come on board, once you leave it for the second and third year, they lose interest, people lose interest, and it doesn't become the focus becomes the next elections. So I was very, very concerned that a lot of the easier reforms was not happening, all right? Some of the legislation that could have gone, some of the things that we suggested was just not happening. And we didn't get any information, much information. But actually, there was a team set up, and GIACC was looking at some of the reform, and they have actually pushed forward an anti-corruption plan, which is quite good. So it's not all bad. I don't want to be unfair. But I felt that they were losing time. And then when they started U-turning, that to me became unacceptable. You see, if it is factors that are outside your control, where people are attacking you and you have to respond, I can understand. But they were faltering on factors which were within their control, in relation to matters where the factors were within their control, which is, you know, the legislation, the drafting, the et cetera, and moving along with that. Because I think if we go to the elections and they don't come back, those reforms will never, ever happen.
I do want to ask you, though, I mean, do you place some of the blame, at least at the feet of Dr. Mahathir, who very early on in his tenure as the Prime Minister heading the Pakatan government, it was said that he didn't necessarily believe in the manifesto. I mean, and then perhaps much more sympathetic to the reform process on the question of corruption. That seemed to be a personal agenda of his, but not so much on the other issues that the Pakatan parties had actually brought together. So, I mean, do you think it was already baked into this problem that here you had a Prime Minister, you had a leadership that wasn't really necessarily fully behind the reform agenda?
Well, I think, as you say, corruption seemed to be his main focus. I suppose he was being honest when he said we didn't think we were going to win, and that's why they had this manifesto, which to me actually perhaps was asking too much, much too much. But we would have been fine if they had come to, said to the people, look, we cannot do this, all of this, we can do this in the first year, we can do this in the second year, and if they briefed us. But coming back to your question, obviously you need the Prime Minister to be on board. But I also looked to all the others sitting around the table to push the agenda. It cannot just be about the Prime Minister. We put in some great people, actually, people very outspoken who fought with us. So I expect the same fight inside cabinet for the things that we fought for, you know, and I felt that wasn't happening.
Okay, let's turn to the unity government. I mean, this is an expression that is a curious one because the government of national unity, usually at a time of crisis, involves all parties. In fact, UMNO and PAS had first used this expression, wanted to exclude one of the biggest parties, which means that it's not really a government of national unity. But it's also an expression now used to describe what Tun wants. And what Tun Dr. Mahathir wants is the ability to rise above politics and politicking, as he puts it. What do you make of this expression, rising above politics and politicking? Okay,
I think what Tun Mahathir is referring to is the coalition cabinet. So in other words, it's not a unity government where you bring in all parties. It is where you make sure every party is represented in cabinet. And that's an interesting idea. It's perhaps a little more palatable to people. And I think what Tun was trying to say when he said that is that, look, there has been way too much politicking in PH, and in opposition. There's just too much politics. And when when politicking becomes a problem, then your choices are not necessarily based on merit. What the unity cabinet or the coalition cabinet, also called a rainbow cabinet, but coalition cabinet will give you or means is you put the best people from every party in cabinet. And you bring in, as Jokowi did, you bring in technocrats, you bring in people from opposition, wherever, from whichever party has the best people, you bring them in. Obviously, the predominant numbers will have to belong to the government, the parties who form government. But you bring in these people, and I'll tell you the other advantage. It's time. Our race relations and rhetoric has descended to such a terrible level. It really is time to get people around the table, including UMNO and PAS, who are the biggest offenders of that, and get them to take responsibility for what's happening in the country.
Okay, so you would be okay if this new rainbow cabinet consisted individuals who were instrumental in bringing down the Pakatan Harapan government?
No, I think what we want is those who are who subscribe, all right, to the values that are either contained within the Pakatan manifesto and who are of integrity, all right, who you can trust, I think also those who have the talent that is required to move the nation forward.
Okay, but one, we're not a presidential system. Two, the pool of 220, because 22 could be enlarged to include people coming through the Senate, right? I mean, that's happened before. But Ambiga, one of the main problems is what is, in fact, the national interest that Tun refers to? He's no longer, he's in some ways ditching the Pakatan Manifesto. He's not talked about a reform agenda. He's talked about national interests and his ideas of fixing the economy. Are you certain that this will actually align with the reform agenda?
Well, I think we will have to, and I know people say presidential, it doesn't matter what system it is. You can still have, no. It'll make no difference. To me, this is something that unity governments have been formed in many, many Westminster model countries. I mean, you know Ramsay MacDonald, all of those. It has even happened in Malaysia after 1969. So it's not alien to us.
But that was a time of crisis.
Correct.
Though.
Are we not in crisis?
Do you characterize this as a time of crisis?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because we are losing investment. The ship is just not steady. And of course, this recent crisis shows that we are unable to deal with issues like this, a crisis like this that happen. So I think my own view that it is the right time because it also helps with unifying the people. As I said, for me, the race relations part is a big factor. So if you want to bring people in, okay, this is how I envision it. And look, you can be creative for Malaysia. There's no set script for how this should look. So you could actually draw up a list of guidelines and say, you have to make sure no more race and extremism, rhetoric, and so on. These are the guidelines. These are the terms. We have a core values from the Pakatan Harapan Manifesto. We must have a reform agenda. You have to show respect. You have to commit to all the various things that we put in the manifesto. So, and there must be commitment towards fairness, integrity, rule of law. All those things must be conditions. Anybody who doesn't agree with those conditions, they don't come in.
We might have to make you the Prime Minister.
Okay, we want to continue this conversation for sure, but we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with a call with Tian Chua after this, Vice President of PKR, and continue the conversation with Ambiga, including a special guest, Nik Nazmi, will be joining us on the show as part of the panel together. So stay tuned on Consider This. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Melisa, Idris, with me, Sharaad, Kuttan. Consider this. This is a special edition of the show, making sense of the political developments of the day. Now, joining us on the line, we have Tian Chua, Vice President of PKR. Tian Chua, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My first question to you is, as a supporter of Azmin Ali, do you accept the cooperation with UMNO and PAS, including working with people like Najib Razak and Zaid Hamidi, among others? I mean, this is something that even Dr. Mahathir has refused to do. Do you accept it?
I think that's not the issues. I don't think the issues is about the cooperation with UMNO PAS.
No?
Basically, there is problem within Pakatan Harapan. And there's also a problem within the policies that we are, implementation of the policies that we are doing. And the government has been under a lot of tremendous pressure. So I think it will be very simplistic to describe it. The problem is between the people who suggest cooperate with UMNO PAS and the people who oppose it. I think that is not an accurate reflection of what's going on.
At this point in time, Tian, help us understand what you would like to see happen in terms of the next couple of days, a formation of a new government, the arguments back and forth between the acceptability of a minority government versus a unity coalition cabinet that Dr. Mahathir is proposing. Where do you stand in all this?
I think that in the situation where political forces and mobilization is very polarized, and public opinion also very polarized, and the communities with different political ideology is also very polarized. And the best way out is to refer back to many of the other countries. You see in Germany, you see at some states in France and Tunisia, the transitional South Africa. The way out is to have both sides or all parties to come together to form a grand unity government. And that will allow us to reduce politicking, to focus on what needed the most in this very critical moment. And I would say that also in the situation that we now, halfway through our term, we realize that some of the massive problems and between not only just between the opposition and the ruling Pakatan Harapan exists such a deep-rooted suspicion, but that also reflected in the society. So I think it will be necessary and it will be a positive thing to do that if all parties can put down their own partisan interests to come to a unity government.
I know things and politics is said to be the art of the possible, but we have some red lines. UMNO and PAS saying they won't accept DAP, one of the biggest blocks in Parliament, into a government. Dr. Mahathir said he would not accept that.
It's always difficult because that just reflects how deeply suspicious we are. On one side, they will say we want to exclude a certain party. The other side, they will insist on they must be excluding another party. A society that do not respect, if we have a political culture that do not willing to even accommodate each other, that would not work. So, of course, in a democracy which is matured and people who have trust in each other, we can have a situation that every 5 years we change the government. But currently, the new transition into a rather new phenomenon, a much more open and democratic Malaysia, we have a lot of contradiction that was not predicted before the change of government.
I mean, this is Tian, if I can just ask you,
if the government were to be able to rule.
Right. I mean, these are aspirations, right? And I appreciate what you're saying. But I will ask you, what is the most likely scenarios that you see panning out? What is most likely to happen?
Can you hear us,
Hello?
Tian? Are you able to hear us, Tian? Just to repeat Sharaad's question, what is the scenario you think is most likely to happen?
Can you repeat? I didn't hear you.
So, Sharaad, could you repeat your question?
What is the most likely scenario? I understand the aspirations. I know you're kind of advancing a kind of moral argument towards the political elite, but at this point in time, what do you think is most likely to happen, and what will those politicians that you are aligned to likely to do?
All right, we're gonna take a quick break, and I'll come. We're gonna try and get Tencho back on the line and see whether we can resolve some of the audio issues. But very quickly, what he said was quite interesting. I mean, this deeply suspicious nature.
Yeah, a lack of trust, and we know with at least what happened over the Sunday and the Sheraton move, so on and so forth, the deep distrust between those factions within PKR, and he represents one of those factions. I do want to ask, though, what is in some ways the real politic of the moment? I mean, what are we likely to see rather than what we hope to see? And that is the distinction I would like to
Well, I'm also
explore.
curious to know, I mean, whether this collapse in the government is actually an opportunity, right? What is the opportunity within this? Is there an opportunity to recalibrate power, recalibrate priorities, perhaps?
I think the opportunity is next returned. Tien is back online
there
with
we
us.
go, we have Tien.
Tien, I'm asking you, well, I did ask you before, what do you think is the most likely scenario, barring everybody rising above their personal interests and going beyond their egos? What do you think is the most likely scenario to happen in the next couple of days?
I think I don't want to be too idealistic to think that everyone can rise beyond their own partisan interests, rise above their personal interests. I think what it requires is for all political parties to see the problem in a very practical way. We have a situation that we could not form a stable government, and we need this recognition so that people can agree at least some minimum structure where the government can be formed. And of course, they will continue to have debates, will continue to have conflicts, but at least it will take us to another level. At least we will have a government by next week.
Tencho, do you think that by calling for snap elections that will stabilize the situation?
I think it may not be the same because it may not really solve the problem. We might be voting back the same group of people. Secondly, it will be a problem that we see a snap election might also, for many of us reformers, we will think that before we were able to show results, and many of our parties could not be able to gain the same victories, and we quite likely will see the same kleptocrats and all the old forces coming back. And I'm not sure whether those issues, that unresolved issues, could actually have a better solution. We might actually see a reversal of many of the reforms that we have done.
Yeah, and considering that this was a likely scenario, do you think people are right to blame Azmin Ali and the 11 plus Zoraida for actually precipitating this crisis, that they had put at risk the reform agenda by doing what they did on Sunday?
I think people must take all sides must take certain degree of responsibility. I think to just blame one group of people is overly simplistic, and it doesn't solve the problem at this stage, especially. I don't think the problems will be resolved, but by Monday there will be a clear decision, because for the first time in the history of Malaysia, the power of parliament has been restored. Means that when you have a difficult situation, while the ruler is the institution of the monarchy is the main mediator, however, it was added back to allow parliament, every elected member of parliament, to lay down their cards. And I hope that after Monday, there will be a clear majority by any of the candidates that are aspiring to be Prime Minister. But my appeal is, whoever wins the race, they are only getting the support of half of the population or half of the political spectrum. Remember, that is not a stable government. They must be magnanimous enough to start the dialogue, and I still propose that the unity government, which includes both sides, not a winner-take-all situation, will be able to lead us to finish the remaining terms of the current government in a relative stable and peaceful atmosphere.
All right, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Tian Chua. Lots of interesting insights that we're going to come back and discuss, particularly comments about, leaving it up to Parliament. Parliament, of course, comprises of not just the Dewan Rakyat, which is the playground of MPs, but of course includes the Agong and the Dewan Negara. We're going to come back with more on Consider This, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this special hour-long edition of Consider This, as we try to make sense of the current political crisis in the country. I'm Melisa, Idris, of course, with me, Sharaad, Kuttan. We continue our conversation with Datuk Ambiga Sreenevasan, lawyer and activist. And joining us now, YB Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad, MP for Setiawangsa and PKR Organising Secretary. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Okay, so let's start with you first, Nazmi, in terms of where you and your party stands. What is the most acceptable resolution, the most acceptable outcome you'd like to see?
I think we go back to the Constitution, and obviously, if any candidate, which seems to as of now is unable to achieve a simple majority, that person obviously should be given a chance to lead the government. But before we go to elections, I agree that elections should not be the immediate choice, but a person that is able to form a minority government and use that as a starting point, whether to get a few more MPs to achieve a comfortable government, or to achieve some form of supply, understanding with some of the parties, that can be worked on with the biggest bloc. And the biggest bloc that we have as of now, official numbers on record are at least 92. Pakatan Harapan, what remains, Keadilan, the APN Amanah, 92 members. So I think this is the biggest bloc by far, and I think it should be given the chance to be able to form a government.
Now, are you suggesting, as some people do, that we could actually have a functioning minority government that gets support, as Pakatan Harapan did from Warisan, for instance? They're not formally part of the coalition, but they come in as supporters and they get some cabinet positions. Is that what you're proposing?
Yes, that's what I'm proposing. And, even this past few days, effectively, actually, Tun Dr. Mahathir, as Prime Minister 7, has stepped down. He is functioning now as interim PM. So, what can be done, one of the possible ways is that, Datuk Sri Anwar being appointed as the Prime Minister and is given time to prove that the government is being able to function and is being able to govern before, if worst case, if confidence collapses, then we go to elections. And But what I disagree is that we cannot say that, cost and all that is a major concern for elections, because when we go to elections, it's about our values, and we have to go back. The power, ultimately, I'm here, I got a salary, is because of the people. And if the government fails to function properly, then we have to go back to the people. But that should be the last option.
So you heard Datuk Ambiga make those comments earlier. Her argument is, of course, the cost, the current situation of the economy, the COVID-19 outbreak, and you're saying you don't care.
No, I'm saying it's the last choice. That's why I'm saying the most important thing is to give a chance for a minority government to function. And there is precedent even in this country, where in Perak, in Selangor, in '69, at that time the alliance did not win a majority of the seats. But for example, in Selangor, Tan Chee Kun's Gerakan joined alliance to appoint Datuk Harun Idris as the Menteri Besar, but stayed in the opposition bench, so that at least a government was formed.
Okay, there's one issue that's been raised, Nazmi, which is the question of the quality of this government. Dr. Mahathir has made the argument that he can't bring together the best minds to resolve the challenges that Malaysia faces at this point in time if he's tied to political parties and if he's encumbered by politicking. Do you buy that argument that he makes?
It's a very dangerous argument. You look at Japan in the 1930s. Yes, I mean, there's unity, governments of national unity that worked. Britain during war, during the Depression. But, I don't think, this is actually due to a manufactured crisis that happened in Sheraton. Coronavirus, other countries are having worse spates of coronavirus, and we've actually handled it quite well. Dr. Zul, Dr. Wan Azizah, Lee Boon Chye handled it quite well. I think the problem was, I'm not against, and I believe we are not against bringing outside talents, which our system is always open. We've had corporate leaders and all that who joined the government in the past. But what I think is problematic is in the previous administration, the first phase of Pakatan Harapan government was the fact that it wasn't the best people that were appointed to the ministries. And that was a major problem. And ultimately, yes, each ministers have their failings, but the Prime Minister then bears the ultimate responsibility. So how can we then expect the same person to form a government of national unity and to be better, so to speak, than the first part of the Pakatan Harapan government?
Ambiga, would you like to respond to that?
No, sorry. I thought the way in which it worked, perhaps I got it wrong, was that the parties actually gave their suggestions to the Prime Minister, who then made the selection. I think that even used to
some names that were submitted by PKR, for example, were not appointed.
Yeah, whatever it is, the Prime Minister has the ultimate, obviously, right to say yes or no. That's how it happens in Barisan Nasional as well. But what I'd say is this: a lot of what has occurred. I mean, I disagree with you that it's only the Sheraton. That changed everything, as if everything was perfect until then. Sorry,
I didn't say it was perfect.
Yeah, a lot of it was self-inflicted wounds. Yeah. Sorry,
but I did not say it was perfect.
Yeah, yeah. It was actually painful. Sorry, you wake up every morning and you hear of another quarrel between this person and that person. So, but look, we're all human. We're going to learn from these mistakes, and I think that's what we should do, instead of trying to, that we really should be looking forward. And I think one other reason, by the way, we shouldn't have elections is the Undi 18 hasn't been gazetted. So we're going to disenfranchise 7 million youth if we have a snap election. And I don't think that's something we should allow.
Right. It seems to me that you both are actually agreeing on one thing, which is that polls either is undesirable or not the first move, choice. Right? The first choice. So the question is, what is the shape of the next kingdom? Nazmi seems to want to go back to a Pakatan-centered government. That seems your suggestion. Ambiga, are you? Do you have any preferences? Do you think, as Tien suggested, that it could be a much broader one, bringing presumably PAS, UMNO, and other parties, GPS, that are not represented in the last cabinet, into the cabinet?
Okay, this is what I think. Whoever succeeds, whether it is the Pakatan Harap, whoever succeeds with the vote on Monday, and I hope there is a resolution for everyone's sake, I would still recommend a unity coalition cabinet. Now, it is time. It is, you see, for me, we've become so polarized. And if we keep on carrying on with this kind of a dialogue and never ever meet in the middle, our race relations will never improve. It really is time to force people to sit at the same table. If you're not prepared to sit, you don't get a seat on cabinet. So you offer it with these conditions that they have to support. If they're not prepared to sit at the table, fine, you don't have a seat at the table. But those who have genuine interest of the country at heart, they must rise above the occasion. And let me tell you something else. This minority government, may I respond to that
sure.
issue? Take your point, that is a possibility. My concern is, though, it really isn't about political parties. I mean, I know they have whatever numbers and so on. I'm more concerned about what is your long-term vision for the country and bringing stability. No, that's fine. Yeah, sure. So I'm concerned because minority government, of course, you have to work with everyone. That really has been the problem, though, hasn't it? Nobody can work with anybody else. There is a distinct lack of trust. So I am saying everybody cool off. We get this unity cabinet only, I'm talking about. Get the best people in the parties and get them all working together for the country. And I think civil society should play a role in providing the input as to how we envision this unity government.
Okay. Yeah. You were itching to say something.
Sorry.
Yes.
No, well, I think you know, we're not stopping. Again, I say, you know, nothing to stop a minority government from doing that. And I think the major problem, there are three things, right? First is that you have, whether we like it or not, Azmin and co have been major destabilizers in Pakatan Harapan from the beginning, even before the elections. Before the elections, they wanted to work with PAS. They were against the Mahathir-Anwar deal. Okay, and Mahathir-Anwar deal was put to the people, and we were voted in on that. Okay, that was very clear. But then suddenly you had people like Azmin saying that, oh, let's give Tun Dr. Mahathir, you know, until the end of term. And that's problematic because that goes against our manifesto. Right. So I think that's one. Secondly, is that when you have, when you talk about racial harmony, you talk about polarization, agree that Pakatan Harapan is not perfect. But ultimately, when you include PAS and UMNO, who I think has been responsible for many of the problems that we face in terms of race and religious relations in the country, it'll be worse. And I think let it be a clear choice. We lost the last few by-elections to UMNO. If the next election comes and we lose, and that's how the people want it, and I think let's be fair. You know, I think we'd be happy to be in the opposition. But at least there's a clear choice of values between those who want to pursue a racial, religious line of government and those who want to pursue a more multiracial vision for the country. I think that is very clear. You know, but if you put it to the people, and we have to trust, this was how the Constitution was founded, this was how the system was meant to be, you know, we should trust for it to work.
Okay, well, can I come back very quickly to what you said about Azmin, Ali and co going against the manifesto, right? Could you comment on the allegations or the aspersions cast on Anwar Ibrahim? You know, talk of him being impatient, talk of him you know, being ambitious or having ambition to want to succeed into the prime ministership. So could you comment on those aspersions?
We've been transparent on that in the sense that the deal has always been Mahathir as Prime Minister 7, Anwar as Prime Minister 8. Yes, there was no mention of timeline, but it did mention that immediately, Anwar was a political prisoner at that time. And the mention was that, you know, Anwar will be released, pardon will be worked out from him, he'll play a role in government, and he will be appointed as PM. Prime Minister Mahathir then said that I'll be in power for about 1 to 2 years. That was on public record. Then he said up to APEC, and a few people supported him. Some of us disagreed, but eventually in the last meeting, it was a presidential council that involved Tun Mahathir. There were some disagreements, and it was Anwar who said we leave it to Tun and you know, to decide. And he said that we will, you know, I'll decide soon after APEC. No, that was the thing, and that was fine. All right. So what I'm saying is that, and Azmin was at that meeting. What happened after that was the Sheraton move. So the fact that he was at that meeting, you know, Tun has already publicly said that he will go after APEC, and Anwar has already said let Tun decide on that. Then why should the Sheraton move happen?
Ambiga, do you think that working through all this are personalities, people who trust Dr. Mahathir, people who trust Anwar, different styles of leadership, much stronger with Dr. Mahathir, much more consensual with Anwar, it's said to be. Is that what is the subtext of all this drama?
You see, the drama has to stop, sorry. So blaming this person and all, I don't even want to get into it because I don't know all the facts. So, you know, but this is where I'm saying, are you as leaders or are you not prepared to rise above all your differences for the sake of the country? And when I say PAS and UMNO must be in the room, I'm talking about good people from PAS and UMNO. There has to be at least one or two. So
is that an article? Who's to decide? Is that an article? Yeah, who's to decide? It's a
Who
good
has
question.
the monopoly of wisdom?
No, there has to be consultation. That's why I say you can create this model. Be creative. If your worry is consultation, then that has to be built into the system.
Is Dr. Mahathir a person that can lead this? Because he's not known to be consultative. He's not known to be open, right? I mean, if we be really honest, what he's been arguing for is really a rule by himself. He wants to be the man to choose everybody accountable only to him. Is he the man to lead your model of government?
Okay. It has to be the man who it has to be the man who ultimately enjoys the majority in Parliament. That's not for us to choose. So it may be Tun Mahathir, it may be, you know, anyone else, Anwar Ibrahim. So it has to be that person who takes charge. And at the end of the day, coming back to Tun Mahathir, he's made some of the boldest appointments that we've seen. First woman CJ, first woman, you know, so many women have been appointed. You have Tommy as AG, you have, LGE as finance minister against all odds, okay? And there were people within PH who objected,
and
as I understand it, you see?
UMNO and PAS as well,
of course.
who you want to include in your grand government, yeah.
No, of course, but he stood up to that, all right? Anyway, I'm not here to talk about the good points of either one. For me, that's politics, and I'm not interested. I'm only interested to know, and I've used this phrase before, the difference between a politician and a statesman is the politician is concerned with the next elections, a statesman with the next generation. Do we have enough statesmen to say to stop talking about all this bickering and differences, which actually we don't want to know the details. I don't want to know the details. I want to know whether you're going to be a stable government, whether you are, you see, you talk about exclude PAS, exclude UMNO, but as a minority government, you have to work with them. You got to go and talk to them, you see? Yeah, and other parties, of course, all parties. So what I'm saying is, so can you do that if you have this hatred? Sorry, you've got to meet halfway at some point.
No, I think I'm happy to know that Ambiga said she'll be fair to both Tun and Anwar. So if Anwar has the biggest bloc and has the majority of support, she too will support this idea. But what I'm saying is that my turn to respond. So I think, but the problem that we have is that I agree. People shouldn't be thinking about the next elections. And I think at the end of the day, that's why we are not talking about the cost of elections. I think, as I said, if this minority government fails, we have to be prepared to face elections. Because the moment you are talking about the cost of elections, the moment you're talking about the cost of politicking and all that, it sounds good at first. You know, it sounds appealing, but then you look at, I mean, just watch Star Wars. Just read V for Vendetta. No, they are a fiction for a reason.
I mean, that's Hollywood then,
No. But there's a greater truth.
Yeah, it's based on real history. So I think that that's my concern is that when we, in fact, the Alliance Party worked quite well. 69 happened, and we can understand why the Barisan Nasional was needed, but look at what Barisan Nasional did afterwards.
All right, so we've had a good discussion. We've got a couple minutes left. I do want to hear from the both of you. On Monday, it's going to be, it's a big deal, this coming Monday. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you expect is likely to happen? I know what you want to happen, ideal scenario, but what do we think is going to happen on Monday? Nazmi.
Well, all the MPs, I think, Oba Wan has met the King as well to record our preferences. So in Parliament, there might be some, because even from Tun Dr. Mahathir's own party, there's mixed signals, about Muhyiddin and whether Muhyiddin might be more open towards UMNO and PAS.
So what is your
I don't know about that, answer? But as far as Pakatan Harapan is concerned, the solid block of 92 will go for Anwar Ibrahim. Whether we will add to that or not, I think you have to wait for the announcement, and I'm not here to make the
Ambiga,
prediction.
I hope there is a strong signal and there is a strong majority for whoever it is. As far as I'm concerned, that follows the Constitution. That is the way we have to go. So we just make sure that the law takes its course. And I'm very happy it's going to the floor. That's exactly where it should be.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this evening. That's all the time we have for this special edition of Consider This. Our colleagues on the news desk will be bringing you all the latest updates as the situation develops tomorrow morning. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Melisa Idris with me, Sharaad, Kuttan, bidding you a good night.